What's going on in the streets of America is shocking to most Americans. But today we have a guest who's lived through it all, not in the United States, but in South Africa. The parallels between what we're seeing in the United States right now and what South Africa witnessed back in the 1990s, even back into the 1980s, are eerie. It's incredibly similar. So with us today, we have a man who's become a friend of mine. His name is Harry Booyens, and he wrote this book. I think it is the definitive book on the history of South Africa. It's called AmaBhulu, The Birth and Death of the Second America. And he uses the term Second America to refer to his homeland of South Africa. It is one of the most interesting books I've ever read. And we have Harry with us today. The last time we spoke with him, America wasn't quite down as far down this path as it is today. So we wanted to get Harry back with us, Dr. Booyens, to talk about this subject. Harry, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Harry. So let's start at the beginning before we get into what's going on today. You say that South Africa is like the second America. What are the parallels between the United States and South Africa that drew you to that conclusion?
Well, both countries were, to a large degree, founded by the Dutch. South Africa, 1652. The United States, I should say, the country that preceded the United States formally, also partly by the Dutch. In Cape Town, it was a mixture of Dutch and Belgians. The same mix went to New York. Both countries were eventually taken over by the British. In both cases, the countries fought wars against Britain for independence. And it's at that point that things start diverging because you won yours against the British and could have control over your destiny. And we were unfortunate enough to lose against the British, and no one came to help. So that's where the stories parted ways. But whereas in the American case, folks moved west to go and open up the West. In South Africa, they moved east to go and open up the East. Quite frankly, if you took people in the Free State province of South Africa, you could probably get Scotty to beam them across, and they would hit the ground running in Kansas. It's the same folks, slightly different accent of English. But, they drive the same John Deeres and they have the same discussions. And they have the same prayer days for rain and complain when it rains too much, It's the same folks.
All right, yeah, it's fascinating, and in this book here, you really go through the history, and the parallels are just incredible. The frontiersmen, the people who trekked into the interior, the struggles that they faced, their religious values, their pursuit of religious liberty and political independence. It's just such an amazing story. Well, Harry, for those who maybe aren't very familiar with what's been going on in South Africa, maybe give us a little bit of an overview, maybe starting, prior to 1994, what led up to that, and what's the situation in South Africa today? Back in the 1990s, it was all day, every day, South Africa in the American media, in the world media. Now South Africa is just, a place on the map. We don't hear anything about it anymore. So what has happened between that time period when South Africa was on our TVs every single day to now when we never hear about it?
Well, as everybody is quite quick to tell you folks in the United States, South Africa had this a really stupid policy called apartheid, which had a number of laws within it, none of which were particularly defensible, and I will never defend them. But in 1994, eventually, it was then decided, let's hold a referendum with everybody involved. And this is where the parallels start picking up again, because just as you notice in the United States, your media, I'm talking about the formal television media and New York Times and those mainstream guys, they will tell you loudly when things happen that fit their script, and they will completely shut up when it doesn't follow their script. Well, South Africa has gone completely off script, and that is why you're not hearing about it. You're not going to be told that 3,000 farmers have been killed, mostly tortured to death. You won't hear that kind of stuff. You will not hear that the leader of the third biggest party in the country dances on stage, basically saying, kill the farmers. And of course, then people go out and kill them. It would be awfully difficult to sell that in the United States, even if your name is the New York Times. And so you guys don't hear about it. And that's why South Africa has gone quiet. It has gone off script. It no longer fits the left American narrative, and therefore we get the usual treatment, complete silence while we die.
Yeah, Harry, you just mentioned Julius Malema, not by name, but the leader of the third largest political party. We have a video of him that I want to play. So Julius Malema, folks, for some background, he was the leader of the ANC Youth League. Now, the ANC is the dominant political party in South Africa. It governs the nation in a coalition with the South African Communist Party, which has had a large degree of control over the ANC going back generations. And also a coalition of labor unions called COSATU. But I want to show this Julius Malema character singing this song. He was ordered by the courts to quit singing Kill the Boer. And so I want to show you his new iteration of the song. Let's roll that clip real quick.
Shoot to kill, the massa. Shoot to kill them. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa. Brr, pa, pa. Attention.
So these Boer people, they make up a very, very small minority of South Africa. It's, I guess, significantly less than 10% today with all the emigration. And there you have a major political leader of the country singing songs in front of his supporters, urging their murder. Harry, how did we get to this point? I mean, how did South Africa descend to the point where you have major political figures, happily singing about genocide?
Yeah, I wish I could actually explain that one, but this is what happens when you have the leaders of the free world jumping up and down and saying democracy at all cost and any cost, and you will submit yourselves to people who are just not on the level of development of what you know in the United States. So imagine taking the farmers of Kansas that I've referred to earlier, ship them to Rwanda and tell them to submit themselves to whoever rules the roost over there. And this is what's happened, but it's actually way worse than that. This ANC crowd that's running the country has stolen the place dry. It's literally, you have a party that is little more than an organized crime ring, and every event that happens in the country is an opportunity to steal. You know, the way that I think it was Rahm Emanuel who once said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. That's what's happening in South Africa. South Africa is the example of what happens when you don't let it. Oh, sorry, but yeah, when you don't let a good crisis go to waste, you exploit every event, and you use it to steal from the nation. You use it to squirrel funds away. You use it to make sure that those who are hurting don't get that money. And by this, I mean poor black people in South Africa being now worse off than what they were at the time of apartheid. And they will tell you that looking straight into the camera. But it doesn't fit the script, so you're not going to hear it. New York Times isn't going to tell you that.
Well, let's get into a little bit of the history, Harry, because, the standard explanation will be, well, the Dutch came and they just started stealing land and killing and enslaving and raping and pillaging. So let's talk about that. How come when the Dutch arrived, why didn't they just form a democracy with the people they ran into there, the Hottentots, the Khoi, and the San, and then later, what was it, 100 years later with the Bantu peoples? Why didn't they just create a democracy and live in peace and harmony? Maybe give us a little bit of insight into what is the real story, the real history of South Africa and how it's been distorted by the present narrative.
Well, the picture that's usually presented to folks, particularly in the United States, is that there were black people essentially on the beach when the Dutch arrived. And nothing can be further from the truth. The nearest black African people were 700 miles away. on the southern border of what is now the KwaZulu-Natal province. So it really took until the year 1702, that's basically 2 generations, before white and black first met each other overland. The people that were met when the Dutch got to the Cape were the Hottentot people, and they operated in small bands that were largely hunter-gatherers who kept some cattle. They didn't grow anything, not a beanstalk. So, and they moved around with this cattle in terms of where the rain was, what little rain fell in that southern part of the world. So, not exactly any form of established civilization that you can form a joint democracy with, even if the word democracy were on the table in 1652, which it wasn't anywhere.
And the culture, the gulf between the two cultures. I mean, I think it's hard for maybe your average American to understand, but the gulf between the two cultures was just absolutely enormous. Right? You had basically Calvinist, Reformed Christians, and then people practicing pagan religious beliefs and engaging in genocide and things like that. So obviously it was very, very different systems. The idea that they could all just come together in a democracy is rather silly. But what about this issue of the stolen land, Harry? I know it's something that you've spent a lot of time addressing, because that's the narrative now that's being used in South Africa. That's why they want to take the farms from farmers with lighter skin without any sort of compensation. The government there, your most recent president before the current one, Ramaphosa, he was also singing these songs, bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot all the white people. Explain this land issue. Is it true that the Dutch and later the British came and stole the land from the native African peoples who lived there?
Okay, maybe just one small point is that it was the guy before Ramaphosa that sang that on the stage. Ramaphosa has had
exactly.
a good sense not to do that on stage.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that was unclear. I was referring to Jacob Zuma. Yeah, not Ramaphosa, the man before Ramaphosa. Yeah.
But far be it from me to give too much credit to the guy who tries to steal everything. The point is there's two aspects to it. The one is where and how much. So let's talk about how much. In fact, if you go and use the CIA fact book's surface area for South Africa, I know that many people would argue with the CIA, but hopefully not about what it's measured the surface area of South Africa to be. I think we can trust them on that. If you take the numbers that the South African government itself provides for farms owned by white farmers, and you divide that by the surface area of South Africa, the number you get is 21.8%. So when the New York Times and CNN tell you 80%, they are lying. I will spell that because they apparently don't know how to spell the word, because they don't recognize it. It's Lying, lying.
The media lying, Harry? No, they would never do that, right? No. Continue, please. I'm sorry.
So, so the numbers, number one, are so far off, but, as the same people who talk about exploiting crises have said, just make sure the lie, if you're going to lie, make sure the lie is big enough. So this is a case where the lie is certainly so big that everybody gets very excited all over the planet, and then everybody forgets to check the numbers, which is where a guy like I come in with my stupid, little Walmart calculator, which I think my mother knows how to use. And I just divide the one number into the other, and then a lot of people get extremely upset. And I don't usually understand that kind of thing. I just know I irritate them, but it seems to me they're irritated by the truth. So that's the first
21%, Harry. How did they get that land? Did they steal it?
That's the next point I'm getting to. So when you look at the way the good Lord made the southern end of Africa, you'll find there's we can probably draw a very precise line, but there's roughly a line running in a bow through the city of Port Elizabeth on the south coast, and then northwest up through South Africa into Namibia, Botswana and Namibia. To the west of that line, you don't get any summer thunder rain, whereas to the east, you do. And you need that rain to create the prairie country of South Africa. That's the part of the world where you can, in principle, keep cattle. There's enough rainfall to keep cattle to have milk. And the black culture of Africa is largely based on milk, talking about southern Africa now. So up to the equator, roughly, it's milk is the thing that counts. For milk, you need cows. For cows, you need grass. And for that grass, you need at least 350 millimeters of rainfall. And that line I'm talking about is the 350 millimeter rainfall line. So, it's not man that made that line. It's the good Lord who made that line. And the rain falls to the east of that line, and which it means that even if they tried to move further, the black people couldn't have survived because there's just not enough sustenance to keep their major herds of cows. Yes, the Hottentot people had cows in the west, but it's a joke in comparison with the black people, who were a far more sophisticated society or civilization. Which gets me to another point, which maybe sounds a bit offbeat, but in the United States, you need to understand that the history between white and black in the United States is one of master and slave. And I've always thought during my life that I've seen most Americans doing their level best to get past that history, and everybody gets a good shot and all of that. Or I thought the US was a great example of how to do that. South Africa is nothing like that. There it's a clash between two civilizations, Western Christian civilization and African black civilization. And never the twain shall meet. It's just not going to work. It'll never work. So back on the subject of how people got the farms, well, initially the white guys got those farms by living in the West, and the Dutch East India Company would rent out parcels of land to them, and they would pay taxes to the company. And then the British came along and they followed very roughly the same practice, eventually transferring the farms on title to these guys. So these farmers all have title to their land. And just for the record, the word used for a farmer in South Africa is Boer, B-O-E-R. I'd like you to know that I can show you the American history books where the British soldiers are referring to your ancestors in New York, upstate New York, as Boer. So we're all Boer. You're Boer as well, okay? That's just that we kept the word and you dumped the word. That's the difference. That's all difference. Anyway, so they owned that. Then in around 1835 to 1838, there was a great unhappiness with the way the British ran the colony. And remember, you won in about 1780s. But with us, we got stuck with the Brits in 1795. And it's not that they were such bad managers, but they oscillated between using their army and using their missionary organizations. And those missionary organizations were, in effect, the mainstream media of the day. And they lied through their teeth. It's unbelievable what they were saying in England about people. And so the government in Britain started listening to them, made the life of these farmers utter misery until they could take it no longer. When the British government actually blamed them for an invasion by black people from the East. In other words, the guys who got killed are being blamed for being invaded. Does that sound vaguely familiar in British politics? So that happened to us, and these guys packed their ox wagons and put their Bibles and things in their family on those ox wagons, and they trundled off northwards at 3 miles an hour. And they bought land and traded land from several of the black people, but they also ended up in some areas fighting with some of those guys that were complete tyrants over other black people. And so do not let people fool you. If you go back and you check the actual history, you'll find that black tribes and the white guys together fought against the black tyrant guys like Umtsilikazi and Dingaan. Okay? In both those cases, the two seminal wars that determined everything, it was black and white on one side against black tyrannical leaders on the other side. Today, people want to forget that. If you could find the ghosts of the men who did the fighting, you'll hear a different story altogether.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, Harry. King Dingaan is one of the ones that I think is so interesting. Yeah, just without taking too much time, maybe give the story of how the land deal went down. He ended up killing a lot of the Boer trekkers and then sending out the big war party. Could you just give us a couple minutes explanation on that one incredible story?
Okay, let's see. One of the most epic periods in the history of Western man, why there isn't like 345 movies about it, I don't know. Mel Gibson would be kept busy for the rest of his life. So what happened is these trekkers, as they were called, that's where you get the word Star Trek from, by the way. The word trek in English comes from Afrikaans. So these guys went northeast into darkest Africa, if you wish, trading for land, making deals with people, settling down, and then some of them wanted to go further east toward the coast, and the Zulu chief Dingaan signed an agreement with them by which he would give them a major tract of land if they recovered certain stolen cattle for him. They recovered the cattle, they went with the cattle to return everything to him. He entertained them, and at a certain moment he yelled, Bulala Abatagati, kill the wizards. And his whole army jumped up, and basically they impaled 100 of the trekkers and threw their bodies on this little execution hill. It took something like 10 months for the trekkers to recover from that setback, because 10 days later, that same Zulu army attacked the remaining women and children and slaughtered them. So something like 400 people died in all. You could not let that stand. So the trekkers got their forces together and attacked Dingaan. Eventually, it led to a defensive battle where the trekkers were in what you would call a wagon circle, and we would call a lager, which means strong point. See, we use that so often that it got its own name, lager. And now, when you're surrounded by 15,000 screaming Zulu warriors, it's a little bit different, from 55 Apache braves on horses. You're fighting a very organized army with very competent generals who know about tactics and strategy and things like that. So it was a major battle. Some 3,000 Zulus died, and there were 3 flesh wounds on the trekker side, which is why that event is so often used as the world's prime example of divine intervention. How can it be that 15,000 Zulus, the most powerful army ever seen in Africa, could attack these guys, come off second best, 3,000 die, and literally there's 3 flesh wounds on the trekker side? It mystified everybody for ages.
And there was, 400 trekkers or so, huh?
Yeah, and again, people forget there was a whole lot of gun-armed Zulus inside that lager. There were several Brits inside that lager. There were several so-called Hottentot people in that lager. So you had a mixture of people of ethnicities, and they had one thing in common. They all wanted to take down a monster. It had nothing to do with the white man as coming to conquer. It has to do with the white man signed a contract with a monster, and the monster reneged on the contract and killed 100 of them, and then killed their wives and children.
And then the trekkers eventually allied with another group of Zulus against Dingaan, another one of the rivals to the throne. It's such a fascinating history, but I want to fast forward to the modern era, Harry, and talk about kind of what's been going on in South Africa. It's just incredible, the statues falling and all the roads must fall and all that, and how it's coming to America. And you called this. I remember you even sent me emails long before it started in America, and warned that that would be coming eventually. So tell us a little bit about how the unrest that was in South Africa has now moved over to the United States, and maybe the parallels that you see between what's happening.
Okay, if I may be allowed to tell this almost like a story with a timeline, if
Please
that'll
go ahead.
work for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess we can start with a quote that I wrote in 2017. So that's one of the shots that I know you have there, and so these are words I wrote on 29 April 2017, and you'll soon see why it is that I chose that date. And I'm going to read it if I may. Today they will tear down Robert E. Lee, perhaps tomorrow Thomas Jefferson, next week Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and then every statue of anyone who looks Caucasian, just as in South Africa. Welcome to America Must Fall. 29 April 2017, I wrote that. And here's the story behind why I wrote that. I keep telling folks, one, I'm not hyper intelligent. I can prove that my wife is more intelligent than me. And secondly, I'm not clairvoyant, nothing like that. And I don't have access to information that other people don't. It's just a question of, do people notice things or don't they? And apparently I notice things. And here's what I noticed. If we look at the first image, number one, that I sent of the statue of Rhodes in Cape Town, that's Cecil John Rhodes. Now, Alex, that's a man that you and I both have reason to hate very much. For guys who worry about the New World Order, Cecil John Rhodes, to a very large degree in modern history, is the guy that personified the creation of the secret societies that folks talk about. And he was funded, very well funded, by the Rothschild bankers, because in South Africa, he was the guy who put together the company De Beers. The farmers, the brothers De Beer, were quite innocent. They just sold him a farm, and he kept the name, and so the company got the name De Beers. And eventually, he controlled the diamond production of the planet. And based on that power, he became Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, so the British colony of the Cape. And he instigated the Great Boer War. And in that war, the reason why I hate him so much is that 57% of the family of mine that was interned in the British concentration camps, of those with the surname Booyens that were interned there, 57% died in those camps. So that is Rhodes's legacy. But I would never tear down his statue. I would take my son to his statue and I would tell him, that's the SOB that I hate, and here's why I hate him. Okay, I thought that was the purpose of the statue. Okay, now you can feel free to tear him down when you wish. Okay, but there was this young man called Chumane Magwele on 9 March 2015, which is the second picture. His name was Chumane Magwele, and that's him throwing human excrement on the statue of Rhodes, the very same statue that you just saw. That was 9 March 2015, and I took note. Now, you can ask what happened then. Well, the students of the university occupied the university's Bremer Hall and then wanted to rename it to Azania Hall. Azania is a word you, Alex, have heard before. It's essentially the black socialist, nationalist, or national socialist name for South Africa. National Socialist, of course, is what the Nazis were in Germany. So I hope folks don't mind if I call them what they are, black Nazis. They call themselves nationalists and socialists, so I guess they like the title. Now, 26 March 2015, a few weeks later, right? UC Berkeley, and if I look away, it's just because I don't want to get this wrong. UC Berkeley students, the union there, Black Student Union, expresses support for the University of Cape Town effort that you just saw, stating that they'd asked that Barrows Hall, which was named for David Prescott Barrows, to be renamed to Assata Shakur Hall. Now, that's kind of interesting. I will get to that in a minute, but first I'd like to go to the next picture, which is a silly little memorial to a horse. If we could see that picture, it would be great. Number 3. On the left, this is where I grew up. Okay, it's Port Elizabeth, the town I grew up in. This is a memorial to the horses that were killed in the Great Boer War. It happens to be a British soldier watering the horse. Well, on 6 April 2015, so it's a few days later, right? On 6 April 2015, they tore down that British soldier. Now, don't expect me to be too thrilled about British soldiers, given my history. But why tear down a rock-based British soldier off a plinth like that? Well, the significance is that it was torn down on 6 April, and 6 April 1652 was the day that the Dutch landed at the Cape of Good. And of course, they have the great, terrible, unfortunate thing of being white, right? So that's why it was torn down on 6 April. So throwing human excrement on Rhodes' statue, yelling about white privilege and stuff like that, then tearing down a memorial showing, the horse memorial, which is innocent, but taking down the white guy on the thing. There's a certain pattern there. So if we could go to picture number 4, this is what happened when the Berkeley guys started running around. Look very carefully, okay? They demanded that the Barrows Hall, which was named for David Prescott Barrows, that it should be renamed to Assata Shakur Hall. It amazes me, very few folks seem to know who Assata Shakur is. Maybe they'll know better if I say that her real name is Joanne Chesimard. Okay, and notice this young lady with Assata's name on the clothes, and she says, Assata taught me. Well, if we go to the next slide, you'll see who Assata Shakur is. So a little piece of the picture is cut off there, but she was a Black Panther, and she was jailed 1973, basically for the murder of Werner Förster, who was a policeman. I think it was a shootout, if I remember correctly, on the New Jersey Turnpike or something like that. They tried a heist of a money truck. She escaped in '79 with a bounty of $2 million on her head and got asylum in Cuba. She is still in asylum in Cuba, and when Obama cozied up to Cuba, he did not ask for her to be handed over. I wonder why. Okay, so that was the next thing that happened. And when I look at this picture, from my point of view, the next thing that happened, and I don't have an immediate picture of that, is students at Oxford University, 19 January 2016. They went on the rampage saying, Rhodes must fall, and again, solidarity with University of Cape Town. And that is because a young black South African student, a Zulu guy, by the name of Ntokoza Kwabe, he had discovered that one of the buildings in Oxford has a statue of Rhodes over the entrance. And typical of this line of thought, the fact that he's actually a Rhodes student, like Bill Clinton and what's the young lady on MSNBC? Rachel Maddow. Rachel Maddow is another one. But I haven't heard her say that Rhodes should be covered in excrement yet. But this young man, Ntokoza Kwabe, arrived at Rhodes somewhere in at Oxford, probably saw the statue of Rhodes, went back to Cape Town, and he's the one behind the throwing of the excrement, not the one who actually threw it. So at this point, 19 January 2016, the students at Oxford start going nuts. Okay? So slowly you see this wave rolling. The United States students at Berkeley had expressed solidarity. Now it is the Oxford University people. And then on 14 August 2017, Confederate statue was pulled down in Durham, North Carolina. I believe I have a picture of that you can see there now. And that was the moment that triggered me to write that quote that we opened up with. So to me, it was a case of it's in your face obvious. How is this not obvious? Okay. So by this time, on 14 August 2017, they toppled those statues. Okay, so now we can move to 2019 and picture number 7, I believe. And this is the equivalent of the horse memorial story in South Africa. On Columbus Day 2019, San Francisco, they came and defaced that monument. In South Africa, they picked the date for the founding, that white people came to South Africa, and here they pick the date that white guys supposedly came to the Americas, right? Not that the United States has awfully much to do with Columbus as such, but nevertheless, he'll do for the purposes. And I made it clear at the bottom there that people should just note that he didn't actually land on the continental United States. So they may want to choose somebody else for this treatment. But in keeping with California, the authorities soon removed the statue, just like the Cape Town University people removed the statue, and just as I'm sure they're going to remove Rhodes' statue off the face of the Oxford University building. So now you ask me, where does this go? And I can take you to the next picture, which shows you where these things merge, number 8. Okay, and there you got it. Rhodes must fall and Black Lives Matter, all in the same demonstration in Britain at Oxford 2020, not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. And notice the young lady in the middle there. We cannot understand, but we must stand. She carries a sort of a veil over her head with letters stenciled on there, white liberal shame and guilt. Okay, and that's why I wrote there, white liberal shame syndrome meets Black Lives Matter meets Rhodes must fall. All of this is one single monster rolling from South Africa over you guys and over the Brits, and sometime or other you're going to have to stand up to it. One thing that's kind of interesting, take a look at the faces around that picture, right? We can move to the next picture. It demonstrates the same principle. But now, isn't this fascinating? This is at Oxford, 2020, a very few weeks ago, the most recent one. Take a good look at all those faces. This is another one about Black Lives Matter. There you see the poster at the back, Black Lives Matter, then decolonize Oxford. And then there's a word that nobody knows in Britain or in America. Voetsek Rhodes. You know what that means? It's Afrikaans. It's my mother tongue. So somebody over there, namely that very, very waxen-faced young lady, is holding up that poster. Voetsek is what you say to a dog when you chase it, and you enunciate it as Voetsek, and the dog reacts to the TS, Voetsek. That's a very high-pitched sound to their ears, and so you want to get rid of a dog that's giving you trouble, just say Voetsek. I don't expect an Englishman to know that. I don't expect an American to know that. Okay? It is uniquely Dutch and South African. So you have borrowed Afrikaans words from South Africa in the streets with Black Lives Matter and Rhodes. Do you think for a single moment these things don't all share the same origin?
And it's kind of coming out of the closet now too, huh, Harry? I think it was you who sent me a statement by the Nelson Mandela Foundation regarding the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, actually encouraging the use of violence to achieve these objectives. They themselves drew the parallels between what happened in South Africa in terms of the ANC and the Communist Party being able to take over, and what was happening in the United States now. So where does this all go, Harry? I know we have another video that we want to show to kind of give people a sense of where this is going in South Africa. Do you suppose the same thing will be happening in the United States if we continue on this path?
Well, I predicted the next video clip kind of will make the point. But the interesting thing is, I mentioned it to another host in the US recently, and then in the last week, I picked up a United States article where people were being told exactly this. That was black people in the street yelling this at white people. So play the next reel and you'll see what I'm getting at.
We don't want your handovers. We don't want you to feel pity for us. We are coming for you and we are going to get everything that you own. It's ours.
So
Yeah.
is there any confusion in your mind as to what she's actually saying there? Because she's saying it to the white people in South Africa. She's the spokesperson for Black Lives Matter. Sorry, oops. Black First, Land First. Okay, that's the name in South Africa. So pick a name. It's the same thought patterns, the same ideas. And they're really just saying, look, forget it. You got to leave, get out of this country. It's ours. We own everything. Whatever you've got, it's ours. Just stop the pretense altogether. Now, you're not going to get this on CNN and those guys because, like I say, none of this fits the narrative. So all we can do is resignedly hope that somebody listens when we speak now and then we figure out how we can die less badly, because everybody seems to want us dead. Now,
Well, and I think it's important to mention also, Harry, and you talk about it extensively in your book, and that is the Communist Party's behind the scenes operations and the communist movements. It used to be directed out of Moscow, now maybe not so much anymore. But to try to create these divisions, inflame these divisions, inflame this hatred, and really exploit people and manipulate people into hating their fellow countrymen. We saw it here in the United States. The Soviet Union, even back in the 1920s and 1930s, had this plan. Actually, it came out from some whistleblowers, including Manning Johnson, who was taken over to Moscow. The communists viewed him as a promising person. And then he came back and he blew the whistle in a document called Color, Communism, and Common Sense, where he said that the communists were trying to inflame and radicalize Black Americans to use them as weapons against the United States to try to overthrow the system of free enterprise and private property and all the rest of it. And so I think we're seeing the same thing now with the Black Lives Matter. I mean, they've come out and they've said openly it's a Marxist organization founded by highly trained Marxists, and yet it's being funded by some of the most powerful capitalists in the world, people like George Soros and these big foundations that made all their money in the capitalist system. So, what's going on behind the scenes in the last few minutes we have left, Harry? And then what is the way for people to combat this? I mean, okay, South Africa didn't go well, and Americans are now looking over the edge of the same abyss. What's going on behind the scenes, and what can people do to resist this?
well, I think the road ahead for the United States looks a bit different. For South Africa, the problem was that in our greatest moment of need, the United States turned on us, tore up our credit card, bank line of credit, essentially destroyed the South African economy in 1986, so that there was no other choice but to fold. It's not as though somebody else manages the US credit card. You're in charge of your own destiny. We were not controlling ours. So you can save yourselves because somebody else isn't gunning for you like that. But I can tell you this. Folks have asked me, okay, Harry, so you predicted this correctly and you called all the shots correctly. What happens next? And the answer is, and I have to warn about this because this is a warning video. They are going to go after black cops. Write this down. They're going to target black cops. They're going to do their best to turn the black community against black cops. And when they're done with that, they're going to focus on black teachers. So you have to protect the black teachers and the black cops. I'm giving the United States fair warning. That's what needs to be done. Also, I think folks need to understand there are millions and millions and millions of very decent, honorable black Americans. I have met many of them and I've enjoyed their company tremendously. Okay, those folks are being put through a ringer right now because they are caught between Americanism, which is everything that you, Alex, hold dear, and Africanism, which is represented by that young lady who said, "We're coming for you. We are going to take everything you've got." Okay? It's a completely different civilization. Your civilization is under threat, and you need to understand that. So don't play with these people. Do not indulge these people. You have to put their efforts down as forcibly as is necessary. Do not toy with this thing. This thing will bite you. Me watching the United States right now is like watching a baby playing with a cobra. Really, I experience it like watching a baby play with a cobra. America has no exposure to this monster that I'm talking about. It does not comprehend it. It thinks this is just a bunch of rambunctious kids that will eventually calm down if they drink enough water. It's not going to work like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, Harry, because we're already starting to see that. There's these iconic videos, where you have these white kids from colleges with purple hair, and they're sitting there shouting at black policemen about how Black Lives Matter. You're wondering, what in the world is wrong with this picture? And yet it's happening. We saw in South Africa what happened. They would murder black policemen. They would, necklace them, put the tire filled with gasoline on, and slaughter them in the most barbaric fashion imaginable. So crazy times ahead. And we met in person for the first time at the Red Pill Expo some years ago. And you had an amazing interaction with Reverend Matthew Cummings, a black pastor in Washington State, who's become a very dear friend of mine. Talk a little bit about your conversation with him before we let you go, Harry, and maybe how there can be a path forward for the United States where everybody can come together and in unity rather than in this division that the communists and the establishment are trying to stir up.
Yeah, it was an interesting situation for me. Here I am, ostensibly the racist in the room, right? I'm a South African. My skin is white. Fact that I have black ancestors is neither here nor there. I look white, so I'm condemned. And I have to go on the stage, within about 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm walking through the area where there's various booths with people showing their wares or their subject or whatever. And I get to this gentleman and this very mature black lady next to him. She is as small as what he is large. And I start talking to them, and he says to me, "Are you the South African?" And I said, "Yes." And he asked me a little bit about things, and I told him how bad it was. And old Harry here, despite being a grown man with gray hair, chokes up. I apologize and I walk away to go and compose myself because I got to get on the stage in a minute. And the next moment, I feel a hand on my shoulder, on my right shoulder. And it's the Reverend. And he says, "Sir, can I pray for you?" And he prayed for me and my people. Sorry. He prayed for me and my people. And this is a black American man praying for this white South African. I'm sorry, guys. That got to me, and it still does. Okay.
It was an amazing moment.
How can I possibly not love such people? Why is it that why can't folks get over this white-black nonsense? Okay. I went to the National Air and Space Museum. And I met a couple there, a typical black American couple, at least I think typical. And he worked in the Air Force, I think, or Army at some point. I'm not sure what her business background was. And it soon turned to genealogy. They wanted to know about South Africa, and they whipped out their cell phones, and the one had ancestry from Mozambique and the other one from Angola. Well, I have a slave ancestor from Angola. The only difference is I actually know the name of my slave ancestor, and they don't know theirs, and that's unfair. And I don't understand the divide in America, because if there is one, it seems to be an exploitation of skin color. In South Africa, it's two completely different civilizations that have almost nothing in common. That's what one is up against there. Anyway, sorry.
So, Harry, in the last couple of minutes we have left here, I just want to ask you if you have any more words of wisdom, and then I have one more thing I want to ask you about also. There's a growing secession movement in the Western Cape, the Western Cape being a province in South Africa, which is kind of a majority Afrikaans speaking, a strong majority Christian, strong majority kind of Western culture. Do you think that is an appropriate way forward for South Africa? Do you think that would be a good solution to the crisis that is now enveloping the nation, if you want to call it that? And any final words of wisdom you want to leave us with, Harry?
Yeah. The West Cape secession thing, I think, is the only possible viable future for that part of the world. In my mind, there is the future Republic of the Cape of Good Hope. And I think that's the right name, the Cape of Good Hope, the Republic of the Cape of Good Hope. And then east of that line that I talked about earlier, let them have what they want to have, and they want to call it Azania. So I will call that the National People's Republic of Azania. It will be communist. It will be eventually run by a guy who looks like that creature from North Korea. He'll be black, and he'll exploit his people. They'll die by the millions. There will be famines, and there will be endless liberals streaming over there to do handouts and then safely go home because they never live with the consequences of their actions. And in the west of the country, one can then, start again and just rebuild the country that got destroyed. The people in the west of the country mostly speak Afrikaans, not because there's so many white Afrikaners there, but because the so-called coloreds of South Africa, people of mixed descent, speak Afrikaans almost to a person. They are the vast majority in that part of the country. There are black people there, but they are a distinct minority. So the culture is definitely Western, profoundly Western. Very little tolerance of anything that would be called an African culture. And I think it's good that it should be so now. And it's not uniquely Christian. There is a very strong Muslim community, but it's nothing like the thing in the Middle East, okay? These are not radicalized Muslims. They've been there since the late 1700s. It's no big deal. The Cape without them would be a very much emptier place. It doesn't make sense. But I can see a multi-ethnic, multi-racial republic in the west of the country where every person has an equal chance to do stuff with equal opportunities, unlike the east of the country where if you're born white, you've got laws against you having a decent life. There are literally laws against white people being able to survive properly there. And I can list them if I have to at some point. For America, please understand that these forces that assail you and these divisions that assail you are not just things made up in America. I've just given you an example of a monster that you're busy importing. And it's not as though I had to search for it. It kind of bit me in the face all the way along. It's just right there. You just have to see how it went from Cape Town to Berkeley to Oxford, etc., etc. Okay? But there are other divisions. You talked about George Soros. I forget now what his name is, but the leader of Hungary,
Orban, Viktor Orban.
Viktor Orban. You know, people have all kinds of derogatory things to say about Viktor Orban. But if you want to understand George Soros, you have to go back through the lives led by Viktor Orban and George Soros. Okay, Viktor Orban is the guy who lived through the USSR times, the Soviet times. Soros did not. Soros's background is the Nazi German occupation, which was not all that horrid, I think, in Hungary as compared with some other places. But nevertheless, there were very nasty things done. The point is that it's that history that plagues those two men to this day. And when you see Orban stand up, put his foot down and say, never, 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 and he fights back, etc., it's because he knows what the Soviet socialist system was. Georgy Schwartz, otherwise known as George Soros, he fled there and became a liberal American, and now he wants to sit in America and make rules for the world. Okay? But if he had had his way, he probably would have preferred having Hungary occupied by the Soviets initially, rather than German invasions. So I'm just saying, I don't want to get lost on their history. I'm just saying those divisions have histories. Folks need to start taking note of history. Otherwise, you are going to repeat it, and you are going to pay for that in blood. Do not repeat history. Go check it. Okay, you talk about Cecil John Rhodes. I mean, look at the misery that man caused. He should be the reason why these black folks in South Africa and people like me actually stand together. It's not. They don't know the history, and therefore they stupidly get abused. I'm the one that suffered the deaths in the family, not them. You know, I can name you 30,000 women and children that died in British concentration camps because of Rhodes. I could not name you 3 black people in South Africa who knew anything that Rhodes did.
Yeah, well, it's an incredible warning, Harry. We really appreciate you being with us. It's funny you mentioned the Muslim community in the Western Cape. I used to live in the Western Cape, and I was in Mitchell's Plain every day for months. Wonderful, wonderful Muslim community there. It's Indians and Pakistanis from who've been settled there for hundreds of years, and it's an amazing place. And you mentioned Viktor Orban. I had the pleasure of going to Hungary year before last, and actually I was able to interview the Secretary of State there, Zoltan Kovacs. And I encourage people to go watch that documentary because he actually talks about exactly what Harry's talking about right now. These people lived under communism. They know what it's like. They know the horrifying consequences of that. And you should go listen to the testimony, why they actually passed a law in Hungary called the Stop Soros Act. And so the Secretary of State, Kovacs, was explaining to me why they did that. Because Soros is trying to impose this deadly ideology on them. And we've been talking about Rhodes, and of course Rhodes was financed by Rothschild. George Soros was also financed by Rothschild. We've discussed that many times. Actually, the initial money into his company came from Banque Privée in Geneva, which was a wholly owned by the Rothschild family bank. So there's so much to digest here, folks, so much to go through and understand. There's no way we could do it all in less than an hour. But I do want to recommend one more time, folks. If you don't have this book, it's called AmaBhulu, which is the name, the African name of the Afrikaner people in South Africa, the birth and death of the Second America. It's written by Dr. Booyens. It is an absolutely incredible historical look at what really happened in South Africa, going back to the 1650s all the way up to just a few years ago. So get that book. It'll give you more insight into your own country, Americans, than just about any book that I can think of off the top of my head. So, Harry, thank you again for being with us. We'll have to have you back in the not too distant future. Folks, thank you for watching. God bless you all. Please share this video with friends because YouTube is going to do everything possible to bury it. And stay tuned for a lot more. Thank you all, and God bless.